Charleston, which I would like to have done, or in the surrender at Yorktown by Lord Cornwallis, and I would like to have been there. Instead, I went back home, and in 2 years I got married. I married a cousin of mine named Matilda Lee. Oh, a precious girl. I was in my 40s and she was in her 20s. We had 4 children. 2 of them died. That was about the way it went in those days. You expected that children would have a difficult time during their infancy. Once beyond infancy, you could expect a long lifetime of joy and health. But until you got to that point, it was very, very chancy. She brought with her a considerable dowry. We lived in her house, a beautiful house, Stratford. In 1791, I had just finished serving as a representative to the Continental Congress. This was before the writing of the Constitution, and the Continental Congress was functioning. And the Continental Congress was full of debates and very little action. In fact, in any significant law, we had to have a unanimous consent. And it was very difficult to get a unanimous consent. Most of us agreed that the Articles of Confederation under which we were operating was not going to be good enough for us. And so the question was, shall we change, and what sort of change shall we make? And then, up there in New England, one of the veterans, whose name was Daniel Shays, led a revolution against the tax conditions. And that frightened me a little bit. Legislatures are the ones who ordain taxes, not individuals, and certainly not mobs. And so I fell into the agreement with a great number of people that what we needed was a stronger government. And so I was one of those who voted to call a convention to suggest strengthening the Articles of Confederation. I was not a member of there. It's what people later on began to call the Constitutional Convention. They didn't have the authority to write a constitution, but they proceeded to do that. And the nation was in such mood that the nation accepted it. As a matter of fact, even I, although I was miffed at the effrontery of this group of people, and my friend James Madison is one of those who was there. One of the chief members who was there. But they had written a constitution, the Constitution had been written, and so finally the Continental Congress, where I was, agreed to the terms of the Constitution. And the more I read it, the better I liked it. And so when the time came to see whether Virginia would join the Union, or whether Virginia would continue to be alone, was a crucial time. We had to have 9 states to agree to join the Union. As a matter of fact, New Hampshire became the 9th state to do that while we were having our Virginia Convention. Leaders of the opposition were prominent men. Patrick Henry would not sign the Declaration, would not sign the Constitution, and neither would George Mason, a most intelligent, well-informed, and highly patriotic man. But I was among those who defied them. I defied them. And Virginia did, of course, join the Union. They had a governor And when his term expired in 1791, I was elected to take his place. I served as governor of Virginia for 3 years. My predecessor had served for 3 years too. You serve 1 year at a time and you're elected 3 times. I sort of enjoyed being the governor, but I found that the governor didn't have as much power as I thought the governor was to have. People dared to stand in my way. People dared to vote against what I told them to vote for. Between you and me, I was glad when the term as governor was over. And once more, I was a free man. The sad thing about that was my darling Matilda died in childbirth. And I was once more now living alone. I lived alone for only 3 years, and then I married my present wife. Her name is Ann Hill Carter. Oh, of great ancestry, by the way, and of considerable dowry. And Ann Carter is one of the descendants of the famous King Carter. And she brought with her another plantation, a plantation at Shirley. We continued to live, though, where I had been in the first place, because after my wife died, I was able to stay in that same house at Stratford. Ann and I, we had 6 children. Only one died. So I had 2 children living from my first marriage, and 5 living from the second marriage. I still had dreams. Other people were investing in land and businesses and making great sums of money. And I felt it was my turn. And so I involved myself repeatedly. I even ran for Congress so that I thought I could get some more leverage. Incidentally, when I was in Congress, George Washington died, a fellow Virginian. He was buried on his estate, Mount Vernon, right there on the Potomac. Several of us made speeches commemorating, eulogizing the general. I eulogized him in my turn, and I described him as first in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his fellow man. I received considerable compliments for having paid such respect to our #1 citizen. But George Washington had invested money in a prospective canal connection between the Atlantic coast, beginning in Virginia, through the mountain areas. And so we could reach some of the areas which were now being populated by farmers. We would give the farmers opportunity, farm to market transportation. And so I invested. I laid out plans, I bought land, I borrowed money to buy land, I mortgaged what property I could mortgage. Ann's father had put some of the land, the dowry in her name, and I could not get to it. But I borrowed everything that I could, and I had it all planned. You know, just like I had done during the war. You make careful plans, and then you carry out your plans. Well, my plans ran into some troubles. For instance, portions of the rivers that I was going to navigate in order to get to the west, you know, they had to be dredged every few miles. There was just no depth. They were not navigable. And it cost a lot of money to do that. But I had decided that at the crest of the mountain area, after we had dug it all out, I would build a city. I was going to call it Matildaville. For my first wife, Matildaville. I drew plans for it. And we were going to pay for that by selling plots of land along the way and using that money to pay for the building of the waterway. And as you might imagine, the money ran out before the waterway was completed. Those who had lent me money began to call it in. And I had not enough money to pay my debts. I couldn't legally touch Ann's money, but I didn't want to. That money was for the education of our children. But the sheriff came, and I spent a year in jail for non-payment of debts. We had to borrow all over again to get out of the jail. Life was not fun. One dream after another vanished. And then it seemed, because the British had not really obeyed the terms of the treaty that ended our Revolutionary War, our Congress found it necessary to fight a second war with Britain. I thought it was dumb. I knew what war was like. And I knew what war cost, not just in money, but in men's lives. And I knew what war would do to people, how it would twist their minds. Young people go off to war and they come back different people. One man whom I knew, Andrew Hansen, up in Baltimore, he printed a newspaper. And the newspaper opposed the War of 1812. And so I went to Baltimore one day to sympathize with him and congratulate him. And I got there just in time because a riot was developing in downtown Baltimore and people were protesting against the newspaper. They even invaded the office, the press office where the newspaper was being printed. We had to take shelter behind some of the machinery, and the mob broke in. And we were housed in the jail for our own personal safety. As a matter of fact, the mobs came on the next night as though they might lynch us. We got into a terrible, terrible fight, a fist fight, a fight where men used clubs against one another. And that's one of the reasons why I've now got to the point where I can barely see. I was terribly disfigured and had to send to get me. And I tried to resume my life. Not able to read very much. I got some glasses. I thought that might help me read. You know, I still had the Latin books and the Greek books. But I realized I was not going to get well in Virginia. And so I told Ann that I thought it might be better if I went into the Caribbean to where the weather was better. And so I took my books and my glasses and made my way to Barbados. I kept in touch with her. She not only had some land, but she had stock, bank stock, safe stock, the Bank of Virginia stock. She began to write me that there was money troubles anyway. That she had tried to sell some of the land, but the prices were down low. The Bank of Virginia cut its dividend in half, and then half again. And the only money that she had left was the money that we had set aside for education. Not for all of our children, but for one of them. And here I was in Barbados, unable to take care of my family. I, who had once been really the darling of the American Army, now unable to take care of my family. And so I've decided that I need to go back and to see what I could do and see if my name still could be translated into some loans or some mortgages. I have looked the last 2 or 3 weeks here in Barbados to find a ship. I even wrote the president, if it were possible, as President James Monroe, he lived a few miles away in Virginia, and asked him if he could not somehow or another arrange for me to come back on a naval vessel. He was not able to do that. And I could not get a ship that would bring me back close to Virginia, where it might dock in a place like Norfolk, perhaps, maybe even in Baltimore. Finally, I found one that was coming to one of the islands in Georgia called Cumberland Island, not far from St. Mary's. And it was the only chance I had. And so that's why I'm sort of packing up today. I hope to be able to make it back to Cumberland Island because I know that my friend of the past, General Greene, had lived there. He had died there. His wife had lived there too, a noted hostess and a charming lady. She is dead too. But their daughter, Mrs. Shaw, still occupies the house, Dungeness, that General Greene had dreamed of himself. And now if I can just make it, I'll go and stop at Cumberland Island. And from there, maybe just make it back to Stratford, where I might find Anne. Some people are called upon in wartime to sacrifice. Sometimes there are some people in wartime who make war profits, become rich because of war. But the rest of us, we suffer. Not only for ourselves, but our families. One wonders, will all of those descendants, those Lees of the future, know how much it cost? And will they, like I, be willing to pay it? One wonders. Who knows who was the youngest son of Light Horse Harry? Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee was about 4 years old when he saw his father for the last time. His father had gone to Barbados. And so Robert E. Lee, for all intents and purposes, didn't have a father, at least didn't have a father who was present. And he longed to set things straight. He had heard tales about his father, the good tales, the early tales, the military tales. Robert E. Lee, early in his career when he had following orders to examine some of the military defenses in Florida, had actually gone to Dungeness, that is the island, Cumberland Island, down in, it's right on the border. How many of you been there? Oh, look at the hands, good for you. Incidentally, I get a little off the subject. You can think about Light Horse Harry if you want to when you're there, but you can also think about General Nathaniel Greene and his wife, Caddy, but you can also think about Andrew Carnegie, since he and his brother had houses down there too. It's a very interesting place, and if you want to, you can think about John F. Kennedy Jr., because he sneaked off and got married down there and fooled everybody who was trying to outguess him as to where he was going to be married. Back to Robert E. Lee. In his last year, Robert E. Lee, now president of Washington College up in Lexington, Virginia, is what we call Washington and Lee today. If the Lee wasn't on there. He had taken a trip once more to Cumberland Island. He wanted to write a biography of his father. But alas, Robert E. Lee was sick. He never got it written. Never got it written. But if you want to list the people who had to pay a lot for the liberties that we enjoy, include